You're listening to the Cultivating Careers in Alternative Proteins podcast, a podcast which features students and early career professionals who work in the alternative protein industry, where they discuss their journeys and deliver advice on how you can start a career in this revolutionary field. This episode is a deviation from my traditional career interview format, as I will instead be focusing more on general career advice for those interested in getting a job in this industry. To help me with this, and to provide expert insights, I have brought on Noga Golan to the podcast. She is the founder and managing director of Alt Protein Careers, a company that provides an industry job board, career resources, career coaching, and recruiting services to the alternative protein industry. Noga is also the co-founder of Alt Protein Israel. She has an MBA from Stanford University and previously worked in private equity investing. Noga is passionate about the alternative protein industry and even has her own pet chicken named Silkie. Our conversation covers how the industry is growing, what employers are looking for, and what you can do to help stand out to potential employers. Welcome, Noga, to the Cultivating Careers in Alternative Proteins podcast. I'm very excited to speak with you today and hear about what you and Alternative Protein Careers have been working on and talking a little bit more about career advice for job seekers in the alternative protein space.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm really excited to talk to you and to be on this podcast.
You suggested the idea for this podcast to be a little bit more different than some of my previous episodes. You thought that this episode could be more of an informational episode instead of more of a back and forth interview discussing the alternative protein industry, the jobs that are out there, and advice for alternative protein job seekers. So this will be a little bit different from some of my past episodes. As maybe just a starting off point for people who may be unfamiliar with Alt Protein Careers, could you explain a little bit more about what Alt Protein Careers is and the type of work that you guys do?
We're an organization with a goal of bringing more talent to the alternative protein space. So we want to make it easier for people to find jobs and to get hired in the alt protein industry. So we have a job board, altproteincareers.com. There's resources on the job board. We have a lot of career coaching services and a couple of other services to help support professionals looking to make the switch or to find a new job in the industry. And we also have a recruiting arm, which is called Alt Protein Partners.
And what does the recruiting arm do?
The recruiting arm partner with alt protein companies or organizations and companies that are either in or support the alternative protein industry. And we do specific headhunting for specific roles. So it's basically very similar to what a traditional recruiting company would do, but with a focus on alternative protein and with a focus on only working on roles and companies that we think have high potential for impact because we're very focused on the mission.
Gotcha. Okay. That makes sense. So maybe we can talk a little bit more about where in particular you feel that this industry is growing and which areas within the industry are in need of the most talent.
So I think the industry is growing everywhere. We're recording this in January 2024. And so there's been a lot of turbulence recently, both in the economy at large, but also in the alternative protein industry, whether it's media or some struggles with fundraising. But I really see that as just one of the dips in the long-term ebbs and flows of this industry. And personally, it doesn't worry me, and there's probably a little bit of a right sizing for the market. But as a whole, the industry is growing, and that's what I've been seeing. There's a lot more demand for alternative protein solutions. There's a lot more interest, not just from people, but from government organizations. A lot of people that care about or thinking about climate have started to turn their attention to food system transformation. It was one of the biggest takeaways from COP28 in Dubai last month, that food system transformation needs to be a major area of investment if we want to make a dent in climate change. So we are seeing a lot more attention on this area, which is really exciting. And so we are seeing companies grow. Right now, it's kind of all of them are growing and kind of finding their place. And so there's a lot of different needs. Specifically for roles, a lot of the roles that we're seeing high demand for, and like maybe a shortage of talent, is the more technical roles, science roles, bioprocess roles. More technical roles are in demand.
Right, okay. And what particular skill sets are needed for those technical roles?
Yeah, great question. I think it really depends on the role and on the specific technology that the company is using. Obviously, fermentation is very different from cell culture, which is very different from plant-based. So I think if somebody has a specific science background that is applicable to one of those roles, then obviously that's great, and they're probably going to be a strong candidate for an alt protein company. But if someone doesn't have those skills and is trying to acquire those skills and doesn't know what they are or how to find them, I would recommend going on to our job board and looking at some of the roles that look interesting in the geographical area and then seeing how you can acquire them. And so I think one of the really strong and overlooked ways to acquire the scientific skills is by working at a food company that's actually not an alternative protein. So if you don't have the technical skills, but you want to have the technical skills and work in alternative protein, it might be worth working at a big food company or a different kind of food company for, say, a year, learn the skills, get the experience. For cell culture, it may be biopharma or biotech, but work outside of the alt protein industry to get those skills and then come back with those very specific skills. And so that's a little bit counterintuitive because it means you might be working at a company that is not aligned with your personal values for a while, and that might be difficult for some people. But what that does do is it gives you and the industry a lot of really solid, good experience that is transferable and highly leverageable.
Ah, right, yeah, that's a great piece of advice. And something I always tell people is the easiest way to get into the food industry is if you have food industry experience. So once you're able to get your foot in the door, it's a lot easier to transition to alternative proteins within the food industry.
Absolutely.
So I want to go back a little bit to where you mentioned earlier about your thoughts on you feel that the industry is growing. Well, I know some companies have done some layoffs, so you think the industry is still growing because those people who are laid off are going towards other companies or that there's newer companies starting up? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say there's probably been some right sizing in the industry. Most of the funding to date has been venture capital money that was kind of in the late 2010s, 2010s, and early this decade, where there's just a flurry of excitement about investing in new technologies and sort of overlooking the fact that food technology, it doesn't really fit the investment profile of a typical venture capital company. And so there may have been some overvaluations, which is very natural. That is kind of part of the ebbs and flows of the market that we see in lots of different industries. And so I think there's a little bit of a correction happening there where venture capital is becoming a little bit more cautious and aware that the investment profile is a little bit different. It is more close to food technology rather than traditional technology. So we're seeing the kind of short-term effects of certain investors being a little bit alarmed or more cautious, and it is a reality and it's something to be aware of, but it's not an indication of what the industry trajectory is in the long run. The need for food system transformation is real and unavoidable. It's not a trend. I mean, maybe people buying the Impossible Burger or the Beyond Burger, maybe that's a trend. I don't think so, but there could be a certain trend around a certain brand. But as a whole, the need for food system transformation is fundamentally necessary. And this is also true if you don't believe in climate change, because just from a geographical standpoint, if you're looking at the math of how much space there is on our planet and what our resources are, you quickly come to the realization that we don't have enough resources to feed the planet. So this is true for all the different types of people and all the different governments and all the different beliefs. That is a fundamental understanding. And then put on top of that climate change and the increasing awareness of it and the increasing awareness of other issues with the food system as it currently is, such as animal welfare and other things. I think there is a rise in awareness and people are starting to be more focused on it. So at large, this industry has to grow. People have to eat. That's kind of like what is certain is that people will eat and death and taxes. But people are going to need to eat, and that food is going to need to come from somewhere, and our resources are limited. Another thing that's exciting to me about the future of the industry is actually arable land poor countries. So think of countries like the UAE and Qatar and Saudi Arabia and Singapore that are actually quite wealthy, most of them from oil if they're in the Middle East, but don't have arable land. So they really don't have much. They're very dependent on other countries and on imports for their food. And from an international power perspective, there's a perceived downside to that, to being tied and dependent on other countries. We saw during the war with Ukraine and Russia, the fact that Ukraine, the exports were hurt. A lot of countries started to notice that. And that also accelerated the interest in technologies that could create and scale the production of food without arable land. And so that is something that I think is really exciting also for the industry because there's a lot of wealthy countries that don't have arable land that want to have food independence and food security. And the way to do that is to invest hundreds of millions of dollars in technologies that can produce food without arable land, cell culture, meat, precision fermentation, a lot of the types of protein products that we're seeing.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And the land perspective is something that not a lot of people really think about in terms of another benefit of alternative proteins. So thank you for highlighting that. And I'll just add that even though I know some companies have done some layoffs, there's been at least 2 people at my company who have transitioned over and are still staying within the industry despite losing their job previously. So I think it's when one company closes, it's not necessarily people are losing jobs, it's maybe more they're just shifting to a different company per se.
Right. And I should also say there's also a lot of companies that are hiring. The number of jobs on our job board, I've been tracking it since we started. It's increased a little bit. It hasn't decreased since we started tracking it earlier last year. So there are still a lot of companies that are hiring.
Oh, absolutely. So what are you seeing that alternative protein companies are particularly looking for in candidates?
The first thing that comes to mind is there's a huge advantage to having both startup experience and big company experience. Someone that just has big company experience and joins a startup often will find that the resources that they're used to and the support that they're used to is kind of different, and you have to wear a lot more hats than you're used to. And it's just a very different culture and work environment. And so a lot of people that transition from big companies to small startups tend to struggle. And then the same is sometimes true with people that have only had startup experience. They don't necessarily know what it looks like to build a large scaled company that has processes and work as a larger organization. So having experience in both of those is a huge advantage and something that I've heard from multiple employers. So having both startup experience or small company experience and large company experience is a huge home run. That doesn't mean that if you only have experience in one that you're not a strong candidate. But if you have experience in both, I would definitely highlight that in your resume and in your application. And if you don't, maybe there's something else that you can highlight and just be mindful of that. For example, you did an internship at a startup and you wore many hats, even though you worked at a big food company for 4 years. maybe you mention in the application or in the interview that you actually really liked that brief period with a startup environment because you got to wear many hats and it was more fast paced, and that's why you want to go back to the startup life or something like that. So just being mindful that those two components are something that employers are excited about. Another thing is passion for the industry, for the mission. I think that's probably an obvious one, but someone that is strongly mission aligned and has a story to tell around why is definitely going to have a stronger candidacy than someone that just has the raw skills but doesn't have the story or the real personal drive. So that's another thing that I would highlight when you're talking to a prospective company.
Yeah, I'd agree. I'd say to a certain extent, passion and drive and motivation can be more valuable than expertise.
Yeah, it depends on the role for sure. I like to encourage the employers that we partner with to put a lot more weight on someone's motivation, potential, ability to acquire skills versus the skills that they already have. Because if somebody's super excited about something and they're smart, they can figure it out on their own, then the fact that they don't have a specific skill or they're lacking one of the 10 skills on the list maybe isn't that big a deal at all. And they might be a stronger candidate than someone that has the 10 skills but isn't necessarily going to be creative and driven to really go the extra mile.
Right. So, what are the most common types of roles that alternative protein companies are looking for? On your job board, what is the most common title?
That is a really good question. And I actually don't know the answer, but I do analyze it, and it's quite across the board. I think the roles that are harder to fill are definitely the ones with the more technical science backgrounds. But in terms of just volume of roles, I'm seeing things in regulatory, legal, business development, marketing, sales, bioprocessing engineers, of course, research associates, food scientists. There's a plethora and a very diverse titles, more than I would have expected. And it's kind of surprising to me every month I update my spreadsheet to see where there's growth. And it's been pretty consistent where there's just a lot of roles with a lot of different titles for a lot of companies.
Okay. So, I guess if you've been looking at those trends, have there been certain areas where you've seen more growth recently or others where it's been slowing down more?
I think at this time in general, there's still more need for R&D at large. There's a whole bunch of roles that are available, and lots of companies are hiring for different functions. But at large, as an industry, I think we're still in the R&D phase a little bit. So a lot more technical science is still in high demand. But we're also starting to transition to the stage of the industry where marketing and business development and partnerships and manufacturing and scaling is becoming more and more needed because we're just maturing gradually as an industry. I would say the increase is probably on that side, but I think the demand is still very high for the R&D roles.
Fair enough. Yeah, that makes sense. As more products come to market, you're going to need more marketers and people with a bit more of a business background than more of a technical science background.
And I think the marketing is a huge and very exciting opportunity because there's marketing for the industry and there's marketing for products, but it's a very new and exciting area. There's so many different opportunities and ways to market alt protein and different audiences. That's actually something that's really interesting and exciting to me.
Yeah, I think it's quite an interesting field too. And I've had a couple people on my show with more of a marketing background too, so I'll link to those episodes. So, a question I always ask my guests is what advice do you have for listeners for getting into this industry or finding their fit in this industry?
Yeah, I think the first thing is don't give up. Don't be discouraged. If you have no relevant skills or if your background is completely irrelevant, don't be discouraged. I have seen dozens of people that have completely unrelated backgrounds find their way into this industry because they care about it and they're passionate about it. So there is a way. This is a new industry in general. So most people that are in this industry actually have a different background. And so you're in good company. I would say part of the advantage of a job board is you get to see a lot of different jobs and you can read a bunch of job descriptions. And so even if they're not relevant to you now, maybe you can see what jobs look interesting to you and why do they look interesting to you? What attracts you about them? And then maybe that's where you can think about developing your skills. So if you know you don't have a technical background, for example, then you might want to gloss over the technical ones and look at some of the other ones and see which ones are interesting. Are there any skills that you already have? Are there things that you like doing that are related to the industry? Maybe you can reach out to somebody that's already in that role and just grab coffee with them or have a Zoom chat. Literally have an informational interview with no intent to get hired, but just ask them about the job and learn a little bit more and make that connection. And think of ways to acquire those skills. GFI has a massive online course. Everybody that's listening to this podcast should take that course. I've taken it twice and I plan to take it a third time. Even if you don't have a technical background, I think you should get that overview and just find ways to gain experience that will support those skills that you're missing. And so it might be, as we said earlier, working at a food company in a different capacity. And if you don't have the skills to work in a food company, so what are the skills that you have? What is the next step that gets you closer? It doesn't have to be a transition from where you are right now to your perfect job. It can just be a transition from where you are right now to a job that's a little bit closer to the job that you want. And that's kind of inching your way towards the industry. And then reach out to us. I mean, we're always happy to chat. We have a career coach and there's a bunch of resources on our website. But off the top of my head, I would say don't be discouraged. Look at the different descriptions, see which job descriptions you like, and then what skills do you need, and then how can you acquire those skills.
Yeah, all fantastic pieces of advice. And those informational interviews are an excellent way to expand and grow your network. Is there anything in particular you would suggest to our listeners to really make their application stand out?
Yeah, I think this power of a story cannot be overstated. I think the power of why do you care about that company? Why do you care about this industry? What are you looking to get from this role at this company? So I think really crafting your story, knowing your story, practicing your story, thinking about what your story is, so that when you do end up talking to an employer, you know what your story is and you can tell your story. I think stories go very far, and a story that ties to that specific company and the industry are going to really help you stand out as a candidate.
Excellent. Once someone has a solid resume and you've got their application to really stand out and they get that interview, what do you feel are some of the keys to nailing the perfect interview?
This is advice that goes for any interview, but be prepared. Practice interview questions. Think about what the interview questions might be. What might this company ask you? If you can find questions on Glassdoor that were asked either at that company or similar companies, that's a great way to prepare. Be prepared with answers that feel genuine for the standard questions, like tell me about a time that you failed and tell me about a time that you did something that you were proud of. There's a lot of behavioral questions that if you just Google like top 10 interview questions, you could probably find them. So definitely go through those questions, be prepared, have your answers that feel right and that you feel good about. And you should, of course, know the company that you're interviewing. So do your research, look them up, look at what their funding is if you can, understand what they do and what people are saying about them and what do you think their strengths and weaknesses might be. And be prepared with questions for the interviewer. They should be genuine questions that you have, but they shouldn't be questions that you could probably answer yourself with a quick Google search. I think that doesn't have a great look in my view. So it could be a question like, what's it been like for you to work at this company? Or what do you think the challenges might be for me in this role or for the hire in this role in the first year? What are the goals or what are the measures of success? Where's the company going? I think also asking about the interviewer is never a bad idea. What your experience has been or what you like about the company or if there's anything about their experience that you stumbled across during the interview. I recommend that and I recommend a lot more. I don't think I can cover it in 10 minutes. But definitely go to our website, go to the resources section. We have a bunch of resources about interviews. I think practicing out loud, I've recorded myself saying answers just because I wanted to hear how it sounded. So maybe get creative and do that, or practice out loud with a friend or with a colleague that you trust. And then if you need more help, I think career coaching is a great and amazing resource. I'm saying that also because we have an amazing career coach that works with us, but also because career coaching in my career has completely just set a different pace for me. I think it's really, really powerful to have somebody that is completely on your team and they're not biased and they can give you real feedback and help you think about things that you're maybe not thinking about or help you see things differently and help you prepare really well. So I think that's something that I would recommend if you're really serious about the industry and you're not sure about your interviewing skills.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought of that. A career coach would be a really great way to maximize your chances of getting a job.
Yeah, totally. This was probably more than 10 years ago. I found one of the best career coaches in the Silicon Valley. It's totally not applicable to this industry, but he was super expensive. I think he was close to $1,000 an hour. And I justified it to myself by saying, all right, let's say I have 5 hours with this guy. I've spent $5,000 or whatever it is. And there's a chance that nothing changes and it was a waste of time and a waste of money. But there's a pretty good chance that it changes my life and my career and my income. And that change would likely be worth a lot more than $5,000. So that's kind of how I thought about it when I got the sticker shock initially. For in this case, it ended up paying off, but I think that's one way to think about it because it can be quite expensive. But I think thinking about it from a more long-term perspective is helpful.
Yeah, that's a very rational way of looking at it. Final question. Are there any resources that you recommend or anything else that you wanted to add?
I hate to plug all protein careers, but we've spent a lot of thought and a lot of time and a lot of resources curating the job board and the resources. So I do recommend looking at those. I recommend following us on LinkedIn. We post things sometimes on our LinkedIn profile that aren't necessarily on the website, so recommend doing both. And then GFI is just a treasure trove of amazing resources. I think if you have evenings and weekends free, just kind of go through GFI, watch webinars, read the research. It is a huge gift. There's very few industries that have an organization that's just giving you things on a silver platter, just giving you information and insights and network and people to talk to. So I think that's a really, really huge thing that we should all take advantage of.
Yeah, GFI is such a great open source resource for everything alt protein related.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we've come to the end of the episode, so thank you, Noga, very much for coming on to the show and taking the time to provide such amazing advice. And hopefully you will encourage and inspire and help listeners to get a job in the industry.
Thank you so much. And thank you for creating this podcast. I think it's really great and inspiring for a lot of people.
Sometimes, after searching and searching, it doesn't seem like there's a place where you can fit into the industry. However, there are organizations like Alt Protein Careers which can help you find the role for you, because there truly is a place for everyone, including you, to be a part of the alternative protein revolution. Now that you've gotten so much advice on getting a job, the next step is to go out there and see what jobs are available. One of the best job boards for alternative protein roles is altprotein.jobs, which I've included a link to in the show notes. If you want to learn more about careers in the alternative protein industry, please follow the Cultivating Careers in Alternative Proteins podcast on Instagram for posts about episode releases, alternative protein resources, job boards, career advice, and so much more.